Everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight or staying in as the case may be. I'm Caitlin and I'm here to give you guys a little bit of an overview of Google Apps. Hopefully we'll get to talk about a couple of them. As Sarah said, feel free to put questions in the chat throughout our conversation tonight. It will be a little weird for me. I miss actually being at the library and having this as more of a conversation, but I do look forward to hopefully answering some of your questions as well. So just kind of a quick overview of where we're headed tonight. We'll talk a little bit about just an overview of Google's products that are available, what the difference is between the free and paid versions, and how it works between different devices. From there, we'll look at some of the actual products or apps that they have, and kind of, I like to compare them to Microsoft apps just because that's where the familiarity lies for a lot of people. And then we'll take a look specifically at Google Docs, which functions a lot like Word, and Google Sheets, which functions a lot like Excel. And we'll play around with that a little bit and then look at Drive, which is a storage component where all of your Google documents and photos and anything else you're putting into these apps live. From there, just a few other kind of follow-up items about sharing things and where you can find more resources if you have questions beyond tonight. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and if you have a Google account already and you want to follow along, whether you have two screens or you feel comfortable toggling between tabs, feel free. But I will be sharing on my screen, sharing in the Zoom video as well so that you can see. Well, I was going to, but Sarah, it appears that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Sorry about that. Here we go. My bad. All right, you should be all set. There we go.
Let's try that again. Let's see, it should be this one. There we go. Okay, so this is, we're starting here from Gmail. For me, that's at least kind of where I gravitate since I'm in my Gmail account a lot, and this is an account we have for the library. But really it works the same no matter what. So that's kind of going to be our home page here, or our starting point. If you use Gmail, you're probably already familiar with a couple of Google's free services. Gmail is one of them, and there are some others that we're going to talk about tonight. But it's also worth mentioning that they do have what they call Google Workshop. It used to be known as Google Suite, so if you know that name instead, it's the same thing, it's just under a new name. And that is a paid version, more often used for people who have, say, small companies or even some larger organizations use it. But for tonight, we're primarily going to be looking at those free products that you just as an individual might use. And we'll also talk about some storage upgrades a little bit closer to the end if you find you're using this a ton. So I think the first natural question is why Google products? Why would I use them? Well, for starters, it's a free suite of products, whereas you're going to be paying for Microsoft tools. If you've ever had a back when it was more CDs, or now it's the codes for a Microsoft Office suite. Those can get a little pricey, especially if you need lots of different programs. All of the Google products are free that we're going to talk about tonight. So you'll be able to have your Word document for word processing and your Excel sheet and so on without paying a fee. The other thing that's really great is that you'll have online access throughout different devices. If you are traveling, I know that's not quite as applicable these days, but still nice to have. And they're easy to use on your smartphone. I used to keep my budget on my smartphone so I could, pull that up anywhere I was and just take a quick look or add an item. And the best thing I think about the Google products is the ability to collaborate. Especially these days, but even before that, just to be able to send a document to someone else and share it, collect feedback on something. I have a group of friends, we edit each other's resumes a lot as we're job searching. I also have like a recipe book that I share with my mother, and we can collaborate in the same document, see each other's changes, and respond in real time, even if we're not in the same location. So I think those are some of the biggest highlights or bonuses of using Google, of the Google Suite. I'm going to pause a moment here and check the chat.
I answered the question.
Okay, yeah, I had a little blinking notification.
Okay.
But I started us out here in Gmail because it is worth noting that you need to have a Google account to use these products. It doesn't mean that you have to use Gmail as your primary email for anything. It just means you have to have a Gmail account. And that's where we're going to start out tonight. Let's see. Before we get started, I had already really started looking at the actual apps. I had mentioned earlier that you have online access and you can work between devices. All of this syncs. So it syncs between different devices where your account is logged in. So if you make a change to a document that you have on Google Docs or Google Sheets, and you go pull that up on a different device, whether it's a mobile device or a different computer, all the changes are going to move across platforms, which makes it really seamless if you're trying to keep up to date and you don't need to keep those USB flash drives, things like that, or emailing yourself files. There's no need for any of that with Google Drive. So for starters, let's take a look at some of the Google products, and we're not going to get to talk about each of them tonight, each and every one, but there are a ton of different products available from Google, and I suspect that suite will keep growing. So if you look here, you'll probably see some names that you're already familiar with just from tech you're already using, or maybe from advertisements. Some highlights of things we're going to talk about tonight. We have Google Drive here, which is essentially the storage space for all of the other things we're going to talk about tonight, which include Google Docs, over here on the left, Google Sheets, which is over here also on the left, a little further to the bottom. Of course, Google Search, we're not really going to talk about that tonight, but it's all part of this Google ecosystem. And this really is just to give you an idea of the breadth of items that are out there within this suite. Here's Gmail, of course, and Google Calendar. We'll be talking about Google Calendar up here on the right tonight as well, just briefly, but we'll touch on all of these that I've mentioned specifically, and there are a bunch of other ones you can check out at a future date if you want. Google Maps. Checking my notes here, we won't really be getting into Google Maps too far, but all of that does handshake or integrate with these as well. So like for myself, I like to have my Google Maps kind of talk to my Gmail, and I can keep a list of places I want to go and things I want to do, tagged to different locations. Anyhow, let's kind of narrow this down to the five main products we're going to talk about tonight. Google Calendar, which, as the name implies, is a calendar based off of Google. And it does sync with your emails. If you're getting, say, an invitation to a library Zoom class, it'll come through there. Google Slides it's a lot like Microsoft PowerPoint. It's going to help you tell stories with presentations, or if you're preparing for a webinar or some sort of class. And that's Sarah would have to confirm, but I suspect she built those first couple of slides for tonight in Google Slides. Sheets is the equivalent of Microsoft Excel. It's a smart spreadsheet that you can work on anywhere. It works on your mobile devices or on your computer, just as the rest of these do. Documents is comparable to Word, a nice word processing platform where you can edit and share text in all sorts of different formats. And then finally Drive, where all of your documents and photos and all of your other goodies can live after you've created them. Now you might start thinking, well, there's all of this stuff that you're talking about storing in various Google apps. How much space is that going to take? So let's take a quick look at the storage plans for for Google. And I will say I'm a fairly heavy Google Drive user myself. And I'm just hitting the point where I'm looking at, oh, I should probably pay a little bit of money to get a bigger plan, because you get 15 gigabytes of free space. And if you're just doing docs, Word documents, Excel sheets, even some like PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, but slides, presentations, those don't typically eat up too much of that storage space. And your email's in there as well, but you would have to have just gobs of documents to really eat into that too much. Where it starts to really add up is the photos. And for me, that's where I said it's probably worth looking at one of the paid options. But with that 15 gigabytes of free storage, it's going to store your various Google Drive items, your emails, your Google Photos if you're using that as well. And then you can upgrade. I believe it starts around $15. It's fairly nominal and pretty much in line with the cost that you'll find from other cloud storage providers. With that, I want to take everyone over to Google Docs. And one really handy thing about the Google suite of products is pretty much no matter where you are, whether you're in your Gmail or you're already in Google Docs or you're in the Google search engine page, Google Chrome's browser, not the search engine. If you see these 9 little dots up here in the right-hand corner, that is always going to lead you to, if you don't have your Zoom window over it, it's always going to lead you to a list of the various Google apps. So here I am just on a Google Help page, but if I go back to the email account, same thing, those 9 little dots, and I can use that to access Google Docs in this case. So it's a handy little navigation tool, basically no matter where you are, to bring you to whichever Google app you're trying to access. So for tonight's demonstration with Google Docs, again, this functions pretty similarly to Microsoft Word for word processing. I'm going to show you where a couple of things live, and we'll create a new document. Anyone who's following along, feel free to kind of go off script and try a few things on your own as well. But my goal tonight really is to introduce you to what's here and enable you to go back and play and learn some more tools later on. So first, I'm going to create a blank document here for us to play with tonight. But it is worth noting, I'm just going to use a blank document, but it's worth noting we have all of these templates as well. And you can come over here on the right to expand the template menu. Perhaps you're creating a resume. If you're really creative, these may not be what you want, but it can be a really great starting point to give you a format and an outline to work from. They also have letters and, these are more, we have a pet resume. I'm not sure about that one personally, but I know I use I actually have started a digital resume with family, and I can just use this template to get me started. And it has a lot of the formatting and things like that already entered in here, the bullets and a space for the photo. So that's a fun place to explore if you're working on a project here. There's a whole bunch of these things. So definitely something worth checking out. But for tonight, I'm going to start us with a blank document just by clicking on that blank document icon. And first, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to name our document. So I'm just clicking here on this space where it says Untitled Document. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it Class Notes. And I'm going to give it today's date, and you'll see in a little bit why I'm making sure I give it a very specific name so that we can find it in our Google Drive. So anyone who has been using Word or any similar word processing program is going to recognize a lot of these buttons, and they do very similar things. But you can certainly come in here and play with different formats and fonts. You have your various menus here to change your font name. asking me to come up with examples, and I draw a blank, but here we can, we can change the font size, the font itself, underline, italicize, changing the font color, and so on. So these are probably familiar for most people. If they're not, feel free to go through and click through them. You're not going to mess anything up. But one of my favorite parts of working in Google Docs is that I can share and collaborate with others. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to find us a version that's a little bit more fleshed out, something that's been used before. Let's see. Here, we'll use this template that, nope, we're not going to use that template, my apologies. Here we go. So this does have some filler text here. It's Latin. That doesn't particularly matter for our situation tonight, but you can kind of ignore what the actual text says. But what's really handy here is like, let's pretend Sarah had filled out this resume. She's feeling pretty good about it, but she wants some help from a friend or maybe a mentor or something like that. You can go ahead and share a Google document to enable someone else to edit it and give you feedback. So, well, this particular account doesn't have a lot of addresses added, so bear with me here. We're just going to pretend this is someone else, but she could add someone else's address here. I'm not actually going to send this to them, but asking them, hey, I've done this work so far. Could you take a look and let me know what you think? And I think that's a really powerful component of the Google Suite, to be able to have someone else come in and make suggested revisions, to comment on it and say, could you be clearer here? Or I don't understand what this means. And you can actually see each other working in real time if you're both there at the same time, which is really nice if you're trying to kind of workshop any sort of writing project, whether it's a resume, whether it's a manuscript, even just something for your family. You can both see, if you have two spouses maybe who are accessing the document from their own devices, maybe even in the same room, but to be able to see what the other is typing and how it's changing. It really, I think, is a valuable component of this. Let's see. That's about all I would plan on going over for Google Docs. Are there any questions so far in Google Docs or components that you'd like to hear more about? Feel free to put that in the chat. Let's, at the moment, focus on Google Docs.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin. Yeah, everyone feel free to pop any questions into chat. I did want to add about the share feature. Is one thing that I like is you have the option to share it where people can edit it or not edit it. So like if I just want someone to see what I've written, but I don't want them to be able to edit my work, I don't have to let them do that. So here's I think it's, yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah. I just wanted to show as you were speaking.
No, it's okay. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Like if you're not comfortable having someone have access to your document and being able to edit it, you can share it where they just see it. So that's definitely an option for you.
Excellent point. And yeah, that's over here. You can just, after you enter their email address, go ahead and use this drop-down menu to limit or expand their powers, if you will, allowing them to just view it, to comment on it, just with the comment bubbles, or to actually make edits if you trust them and want them to do that.
And Caitlin, we have a question. Can Word documents be converted to Google Docs or vice versa? Which I think we were covering later, but it's up to you.
We can cover it now. We can touch on it again a little bit, but yes, you can bring a Word document in. You can also go ahead and save this as a Word document. Occasionally, some of the formatting gets a little funky, so I would certainly open the file in the new format just to make sure everything looks the way that you're expecting, particularly if it's something you're sending and want it to look a certain way. But for an example here, you can go ahead and save this document. I can download it. You'll see over here a menu where I can download it as a docx file or a Microsoft Word file. Or I could even save it as a PDF file if I needed it in that format. The others are probably lesser used in this example, but they are available. And quite similarly, if you had a Word document and maybe you don't have Microsoft Word on your computer, you can bring that into your Google Drive using that kind of classic menu where you browse and you go to the correct folder and select it. Or there's like a drag and drop feature allowing you to bring it into your Google Docs.
Okay, and we have another question. I'm not sure I understand. Caitlin, is there a tracking feature in Google Docs? So is that a version? If the person wants to expand on it, are you talking about tracking like changes, like edits, or like versions? I'm not sure if I understand the question. Yeah, tracking edits. So I think in Word,
I will say that is one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Word does have a really handy track changes feature, and I will say that is one drawback of Google Docs. I don't find that feature quite as robust. You can go back and see changes, but it's just not quite as smooth. Let's see if I can bring that up in our version history. It's been a while since I've had to do that. Yeah, so you can bring up version history. And actually, this is a really good example. Off the top of my head, couldn't find it on the menu, but we have the power of Google right in our Google Doc, and their help feature is really on point. I find it's actually often faster to type a search word instead of trying to find it in the menu. So there's a little tip as well. But to see the changes that have been made, so we're going to get rid of this word right here. But if I wanted to see the changes that have been made, or maybe a mistake was made and I want to go back a bit and undo those things, but maybe it's further back than an undo button will allow. You can use the version history here. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the changes that were made. And this document doesn't have a lot, but it would allow me to go back, in this case, all the way back to September of 2020 to select an earlier version, or if I wanted, I could kind of toggle between these two. I'm just clicking here on the one from today and then switching back. And I could toggle between them to see any changes that were made, or just go ahead and click the three dots to restore this, or even make a copy of this if I wanted both to exist. But definitely not as robust as Microsoft Word. And I know that was a big point of frustration for me when I switched over in my last job. It was very time consuming to see every little edit that had been made to text. Any other questions on Microsoft Word before we, I'm not Microsoft Word, I apologize. It's been a long day on Google Docs before we move over to Google Sheets.
I don't see any for now. I'm sure we can come back if something else comes up later.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit to Google Sheets. Going back, I'm going to come over to these 9 little dots again and select Google Sheets. For my spreadsheet fans out there, this is going to feel very familiar to Microsoft Excel. And the setup itself is pretty similar to Docs that we just looked at. We have a blank Sheets file that we can start with. And then there's also all of these handy templates that I think are worth at least looking over if you're starting a project from scratch and maybe aren't as comfortable with some of the formatting, or you kind of need a guiding hand on some of these. So just something to keep in mind, various timelines for project management, a timesheet, an invoice page, scheduling, calendars, a budget or a to-do list. If you're starting something like that, one of these templates might fit your needs. But for today, let's just start with a blank Excel, a blank Sheets file. So as with the docs file, renaming it, you just need to come up here and click in this little box here that currently says Untitled Spreadsheet. And you can go ahead and rename it. Hopefully something more descriptive than my silly names tonight, but that is going to be the name that you search for, just like you would on your computer's hard drive or any other storage space. So you're going to want to go ahead and make that nice and descriptive and easy to find what you're looking for. Let's see, looking over here at my notes. I'm actually going to backtrack us one step. You certainly could start with that blank one, but we're going to start with this monthly budget form template to get us started, just so that we don't have to create everything from scratch for our little exercise tonight. So yeah, this is a template they've designed showing some various categories for budgeting. And we can play with this a little bit, and you'll see how it adjusts and how it changes the charts. And this may or may not work for your needs, but it is a good example of one possible use for Google Sheets. So let's see. This person has planned $950 of expenses for this month, but let's say they've picked up some takeout and they've spent $20 maybe on the first of the month on some takeout. And you can see here, I'm sorry, that's the planned column. So we'll say they maybe have planned on spending $75 on restaurants for the month, and $250 for groceries. So it's going to show the column here where they're currently $75 in the black. They still have money in that budget, but maybe first of the month they went out and picked up some takeout. And it is going to adjust accordingly. The reason you just saw that little notification flash on the screen is that this template has actually already gone ahead and created a secondary page that I wasn't going to use in tonight's example, but good to know it's there for your future needs. So it's just going to go ahead and adjust this. You can also, use formulas the way you would in a more traditional sheet or Excel file. If you wanted to say have the sum of the food budget, those are both food items, and we could go ahead and sum those. And it will give you what it deems smart suggestions. Definitely take them with a grain of salt. I will say sometimes it knows what it's talking about, and sometimes to add things that you don't want to. Give it adequate consideration. It is not as smart as it thinks it is. So yeah, you can change these categories if you wish. You can add categories. There's some room for custom categories here as well. So that's a little intro to the budget. It works, or I'm sorry, to Excel using I'm having a day with words, I apologize. A little bit of an intro to Google Sheets. The other components work very similarly to Google Docs that we talked about, where you can share it. Again, using this little icon up here. Right now, this file is only available to me, and that I can always go back and change that and revoke access if I want. But if I wanted to share this with someone, maybe in the case of a budget, it's a spouse or a housemate or someone else who you share financial information with. Or maybe you're planning a trip for someday when we can all get out and do those things a little bit more, and you want to share that trip information with your potential travel mates. That would be here, and just like we saw with just like we saw with Google Docs, you can change the permissions to allow them to comment versus actually making substantial edits to the sheet. And you can even add a little message if you need to give them some context. That is the quick overview of Google Sheets. Quickly looking to see if we have any questions on Google Sheets, although we can certainly come back.
So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, or if you're think of them later, it's fine to put them later, but we'll make sure we round back to that.
Absolutely happy to double back. If my errors in speech have not given it away, the congruencies between the Google products and the Microsoft products are strong. Once you get used to using the Google products, your brain can very easily switch between the two, confuse them when you're using them or speaking, as you've all seen tonight. So I'm not seeing any questions on Google Sheets. I am more than happy to double back if you think of something later, or if I'm moving quickly and you're still trying to formulate your question. But I want to show you all where these various documents you create will live. So again, using that little navigation menu that you're going to find at the top right. Much easier when you don't have a Zoom hovering over all the boxes that you actually want to click on. So all of these documents, whether you've created a resume or a budget, or maybe an outline of a trip you're taking, or recipes you want to share with your family, whatever the document is that you've created, document, PowerPoint or slides presentation, or Sheets file, they're all going to live in Google Drive. So you can actually just go to drive.google.com, which is a little faster if you're doing that, you're accessing that regularly. But this is a space where all of those items you've created will live. And you'll see here, there's the monthly budget that we were just working on as an example. There's Sarah's resume that she had prepared, as well as our class notes that we had started, and a whole bunch of other documents from other classes and things that predate this. But these all live in here, which is why it's really important to give a descriptive name to your files, just like you would if you were saving them on your computer's hard drive or any other space where you would save documents. And furthermore, just like other places that you organize and save your documents, you can create folders. So here we have a couple of folders that were already created. You can also, I've just gone and right-clicked here on the folders menu to create a new folder. If we wanted to say, put, here's the recipe book that we started working on. Clearly I have food on the brain tonight. So you can assign documents to certain folders. So I've again right-clicked on this recipe that we used as an example, and I'm going to tell it to move it to. I can go and select the correct folder to keep my documents organized and easy to access. And then you know, maybe I have a couple dozen of those different recipes, or people are contributing to the collection, and they would all be organized together, hopefully with some nice descriptive names, and all in one place. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I do want to point out that you can save these in different formats, just like we talked about with Google Docs, saving it as a Word document or as a PDF. Similarly, you can save your Google Sheets, that spreadsheet format, as an Excel file or as CSV at comma, one of the comma. I always forget what CSV stands for, my apologies. But that's going to allow you to take it elsewhere and give it to someone who might need to use it in a slightly different capacity outside of the Google universe, if you will. Any questions on Drive or how the storage system here works? I did realize I neglected to mention over here, we talked a little bit about storage recently. As you can see, this account doesn't have a whole lot stored. It's about 2 megabytes out of the 15 gigabytes. So they've got lots of space available still. And this little bar will fill up. Google is pretty good about notifying you as you get closer to your storage limit, because if you surpass it, it does stop receiving email. You can't save more documents, but it is very good about notifying you. And there's a lot of space to work with. As I said earlier, it's really the photos that start to eat up space. And they do offer additional space. So this is your 15 gigabytes for free. And that $19 price I mentioned is per year for 100 gigabytes. And one thing that's really cool about that, if you do find you need additional storage space, any of these 3 categories, you'll see that you have options to add your family. So you can actually share that. It's a family plan, just like maybe you have a cell phone plan that you've added family members to. You can share that storage space, still toggling the privacy control, so you don't have to share all the documents, but that space can be divided, kind of how you would divide your cell phone data on a family plan.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Looks like we have a question. Can a whole drive me share with others or just the files? Can you share the whole drive? Oh, as opposed, I think what the question is, do you have to share file by file, or you can share the whole drive? I think if you're sharing the whole drive, you're basically logging in under the same account.
Right, so what I was just talking about was sharing. If you have 100 gigabytes of space, you can link different Google accounts to allow, so like kind of like with a cell phone plan, if you have, I don't know, 20 gigabytes of data, you can have 4 different users who use from that same pool. If you purchase a larger plan, you can certainly do that. But I'm wondering, and the person who asked the question, feel free to clarify if I've gone in a different direction than you were hoping. I'm wondering if you might be asking about the actual documents, if you have to share an individual file versus if you can share, say, a collection of files. And the answer to that would be you can do both. So we saw earlier how you can share an individual file to let them see it, to let them edit it, to let them comment, whatever you've set. But you can also, so let's say here, you can also share just an individual folder or several folders if you wish. So here's that recipe book folder we created earlier. I can right click on that. And in our example, we only have 1 file in there, but you could have dozens and dozens of files in there. And I could go ahead and share the contents of this specific folder with 1 or more individuals, and you can just separate them by a comma, or if they're in your address book, it'll pop up there. You can share a folder, and I know I did that a couple of years ago. I was planning a trip, and I had itineraries, I had approximate budgets, I had some photographs, I had a whole collection of things that I wanted to share with the 9 other individuals who were going on this trip. And by putting it in one Google Drive folder, I was able to share it just simply by entering their email address here.
And it's important to mention, so like if I have a Google account and I share a bunch of files with Caitlin, they don't count against her free storage because I own them. So they're counting against my storage, but they don't count against hers. So if someone shares a ton of stuff with you, it's not going to run up your storage.
Correct. And you can also remove it from your account at some point, you know, after that trip or whatever, you can remove it so you don't have to see it come up in your search and your access files, but it is not counting against your storage capacity.
And Caitlin, one thing I forgot to include, but I think is important, is to show how to make a copy. So like, for example, like if you have
absolutely.
I use it a lot for resumes. Like I like to keep my old resumes in case I want to go back to them.
Sarah, you cut out there, but if you were making a great point, keeping a copy in case you want to double back, or if maybe you're applying for different jobs and you need kind of similar but slightly different things. Is that where you were headed?
Right. So like if I had that kind of ridiculous resume from September, and let's say I'm going to start my job search again now and I want a new resume, I might start from that resume in September, but I'll make a copy and put, for me, I usually use the month and the year so I know when it was. And that way I'm not writing over what I had.
Exactly. So you can do that. I pulled up that document that Sarah was referring to. I can do that here by selecting file and then make a copy, and changing the month here, or perhaps the like name of the place you're applying to, or however your organizational structure works. Or you can also do that from this menu. Here's a different resume. And again, I'm just right clicking here and I get just tons of options. But the one we're looking for in this case is make a copy. So I can select that and it's going to give me a copy of that file for me to work from. And that original has been, left there for future reference or to double back to if needed.
Thank you very much.
Well, there are, again, I'm always happy to double back if questions have emerged about previous topics, but I did quickly want to touch on Google privacy, really just kind of web privacy in general. Consider this your good old reminder that we all sometimes need. I'm hoping many people are already familiar with and using two-factor authentication. That's where it's going to typically email or text you a code to ensure that you really are who you say you are when you're accessing your account. And especially if you're storing a lot of things that might be personal, or if you're using email as your main email account where it's tied to a lot of different things. Super important to have that extra layer of security. So this is a page I just brought up here with a little bit of information about two-factor authentication. And Google actually makes it pretty easy. I actually recently had to reinstall the Gmail app on my iPhone because it had somehow deleted it. My iPhone is a little challenging sometimes. But I reinstalled it, and the two-factor really, using my password and everything else, I just had to log in and provide it was either a 2 or 3 digit code. And typically it's only a short code that you provide to confirm that you really do have access to that account and that you are there legitimately. Definitely something I would encourage you to check out, not only for your Google account, or other accounts that you have, particularly if it has, that's always, sensitive information. Those are the accounts you really want to think about adding that two-factor authentication. The other thing I wanted to show you quickly is a kind of a privacy checkup that Google has, where you can take a look at the privacy controls. I know some of this has been in the news lately, and it's something I would definitely keep an eye on. Not something to stress out about per se, but something to be aware of. There's a lot of talk surrounding The use of cookies has been in the news for Google. They're getting away from using third-party tracking, and it may change the ads that follow you around the internet, but it also may not. That's kind of still to be determined. But the long and the short of that, I guess, is that, so right now, if you say, I need a new vacuum, and you do a couple searches and you haven't decided on it, or maybe you do go buy one this weekend or something, you're probably going to see vacuum ads for a long time. And that's because these cookies that are attached to your individual web browsing follow you around the internet, and that is changing. Google has said they're going to do away with that. Companies, of course, want to monetize your searching, and they're looking at other ways to track you, even if it's not individually, you as one person, but as a cohort or as a collective. People who visit, people who read about March Madness and vacuums and this other thing that you looked up tend to like this product. So they are finding other ways to keep an eye on what you're most likely to click on, even if it's not personally identifiable. But yeah, so this is just a safety page from Google that kind of goes over some of the privacy controls that you have, and tries to make you a little bit more of a informed consumer of their products. So I would definitely encourage you to check this out and learn about the security that's there, but also the privacy controls that you have, and what you may be able to toggle on or off, and what you don't have control over, just so you're aware and you can use or not use the services in a way that you are comfortable with. I know for me personally, I would never put like my tax return in my Google Drive. That's going to live on my hard drive in a very safe and secure place. Not that I worry a ton about it, but something that is that sensitive, you definitely want to be a little more cautious about, just as a precaution. Last but not least on my list of things, and then I'm happy to keep the floor open for questions, it's just kind of a follow-up on a couple of places if you want to learn more about the topics we've covered tonight. Google has some resources available on their website. So here you can, of course, just search and hopefully find the article or articles that are going to help you. But if you have a specific question about a Google app, one that we've covered tonight or one that we haven't, you can go ahead and visit the page for that. I know we didn't really get a chance to touch on Google Photos, for example, so you could go ahead and click on that. You can search within Google Photos, or you can come through here and look at some of the information they've outlined here. Another great resource that I've used actually for a bunch of things, not Google. I personally haven't used it for Google, but it's just a great resource that I know the library shares, I think, in every one of their classes, is lynda.com. And this site is free with your library card and password. So if you've been using library services, you have this available to you too. And they've got some great resources on all sorts of different topics. So even if you feel like you're a pro at Google Suite now, there's still a lot of great stuff in here. But they do have a bunch of resources for Google as well. So that wraps up the outline I had for tonight. Any questions or things people want me to go back and clarify?
Caitlin, I actually had a question. This made me think the question that we got about the versions is the Google add-ons, which I actually don't use because I use the Google Docs a lot in my personal life, but I kind of just do basic docs. So I don't really need an add-on, and I didn't actually see a version control, but I wonder if it's worth just demoing like what those are so people can get the most out of their Google Doc and Google Sheets and everything.
Absolutely. So I've brought back a Google Doc that we were looking at earlier. And if you come over here to the right-hand side, it will link to your calendar and other things, but as you come down the menu a little bit, you have get add-ons. And we're all going to learn a little bit together tonight because this isn't something I do a ton of either. I personally use a couple of add-ons in my web browser, and this is going to function similarly if you happen to use those as well. But you can look through here and look for a tool that might fit your needs. So let's see what happens if we time tracking. I'm not seeing anything quickly. It doesn't mean it's not there. But for an example, let's instead look at Easybib here. Perhaps for any of our, maybe our students who are taking this class or anyone else who might need to make sure their sourcing is up to snuff. So all I did is I've pulled this up by clicking on it, and I can see a quick summary of what it does. So this is going to help footnote and correctly annotate your sourcing if you're, say, turning in a research paper or other document where that is most important. So you've got the information here, and I can go ahead and install this.
So Caitlin, if you were to install Easybib here and then you were to access your Google Drive on another computer, would you still have this add-on?
I would, which is really helpful. It looks like I'd have to sign in again to the library account, so I'm actually not going to follow through with the sign up on this particular one. But yes, it would follow me, and that is the really handy thing about the Google Apps products in general, is it follows you from device to device, whether you're using your personal laptop and then your smartphone, or maybe your computer and then you're traveling and maybe you and your spouse only brought one computer, so you're using theirs. It makes it a fairly seamless experience, at least in my personal experience.
And then we had another question. I can either take this or you can, but do you need to go through the library website to use lynda.com? Yes. So if you just go directly to lynda.com, it's basically they're going to be asking you to put in your paid account. If you want to use lynda.com free with your library card and password, you need to go through the library website, and you can of course bookmark that. So it's going to be under e-collection, under the black, and then it's learning tools. And Lynda should be one of the options. Scroll down there under L. Yep.
Here we go.
And you just put in your, okay.
My internet connection has slowed to a crawl.
There we go. So just so you know, if you have a regular library card, that's great. You can start using Lynda now. If you don't have a library card and you apply online, you cannot use that account to access Lynda. It's a licensing arrangement we have with them. You have to have a regular card where you go in and show your ID and your proof of address.
Interesting.
So are there any other, any other questions?
Everybody may be off exploring Google Docs and Google Sheets.
Which is great. I highly recommend doing some exploring. I love Google Docs and Google Sheets in particular because it's so easy. Like I can pull it up on my phone real quick. I mean, I don't use them on my phone a ton, but like if I'm out and about and I need to. Okay, so we do have a question. Are all the add-ons free?
Which maybe our question asker could clarify. What add-ons are you looking at? The ones that we just probably these, I'm guessing. Okay.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, I've never seen one that isn't, but I cannot say with absolutism here. Sarah, does your knowledge go any deeper than that?
I do not know.
I personally have never seen one, but words like always and never kind of scare me. So I'm going to say they generally are. I've never seen one that is paid, but I can't say with absolute certainty.
I think if you're going through Google, they're free. My guess is you could probably go on the World Wide Web and find one that you kind of like back end in or something, but like I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, and they may not be free.
Right, and the other nice thing about going through this Google interface for it is, they've been vetted by Google. If you go onto the web and describe something, you don't know where it's come from or what you perhaps are downloading. So just something to keep in mind, kind of going through a known entity.
And one thing I did want to just touch on, because we normally get a lot of questions about the space, the free space and what that means. It is shared space, so it's shared across your Google Drive, your Gmail, and your photos. And it's important to know that when your account reaches its storage limit, like you won't be able to send or receive email. So as Caitlin said, like I don't pay for Google storage and I use a lot. Like I use Gmail, and she's just hitting up against it now. So I don't want that to like stress you out, but I do want you to make sure that you pay attention.
And when you even get close to it, they warn you. I'm only close to that because I was getting rid of an old laptop and I put thousands of photos in Google Photos. So if you don't do that, you're probably going to be okay. But even if you do something like that, they keep giving me warnings. I am well aware that I'm getting close to that. So it's not going to take you by surprise and all of a sudden your emails just stop coming in.
And then there's a lot of changes coming in June of this year. So it says starting June 1, any newly created docs, sheets, slides, drawings, forms, or Jamboard files, which I don't even know what that is, will count towards your storage. So there are going to be some changes starting in June. The photos are a little bit wonky. So if the default Google photo storage is like a little bit lesser quality than probably what's on your phone, and they don't count it. I don't think they count against no, it does count against. Yeah, so they're going to start counting against you in June. So you just might want to be careful because photos do take up a lot. And when we say Google Photos, like I think that includes your videos too on your phone if you're using. You can probably set that. So you might want to just pay attention to what that means if you start using Google Photos, because that'll start eating up your storage a lot. But like Caitlin said, they will warn you. They're not going to you're not going to waltz in one morning and be like, oh, I can't send email. Like you will be warned by Google because they want to sell you the storage. Or you can clean up. You have two choices, of course. You can clean up.
That's where I'm currently residing is I could get rid of a bunch of garbage I don't need. But here we are in Google Photos, and this account doesn't have any photos added right now, so it's not taking up space, but you can change. Right now it is storing at original quality, which, as Sarah said, is a little less than what like a recent smartphone is going to be taking photos at. You can, of course, switch to high quality, but will take storage space a little bit faster. So if it's just something where you're keeping a handful of photos, maybe for a specific project or to share with someone, you might make one decision versus if you are storing tons and tons of photos. It's just here with this little wheel icon.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about privacy, so if we gave an example, or Caitlin went over an example of a budget. So if you have a budget file and it says, oh, I spent $250 at Giant and I spent $40 at the gas station or whatever, like you probably don't want the whole world knowing that, but it's not like private per se. I wouldn't create a Google Doc with all your passwords or all your credit card information or all your social security numbers, like, or, you know, for your family. Like, I don't want you to be afraid that someone's going to hack, but like, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable having that information in my Google Docs.
It's not so much for hacking. I mean, yes, it could, but it's more you forget to log out of a shared computer, or,
Yeah.
you know, you accidentally send the wrong file. If it's your, you know, if it's your to-do list, it's kind of like, oops, you know, maybe I'm a little embarrassed, but if it's your password list, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. So just be mindful of that. And if there's no more questions, we can wind up, but we can wait a minute just in case you're still formulating any questions, but we're happy to take them. Okay, and if not, I want to thank everyone for attending, and thanks to Caitlin for presenting. And again, I'll send a follow-up email with a link to our survey. And so if you have follow-up questions, you'll have my email so you can get in touch, and we'll make sure we get that answered. But I hope everyone enjoys the evening, at least here in Arlington. It looks like the sun is finally coming out here at 6:30. So I hope you enjoy your evening, and everyone take care.